Hi, my name's Matt Hickman. I work here at the Wellcome Trust. I'm in the education and learning team. So you met Hilary Levers at the beginning of the day. She started us off. I'm excited about today. It's always really good to hear you guys talk, to see the work that you've been doing. I think I've come along to all of these. My laptop got nicked to the first one, so I was sort of embedded in my memory. Not since. It only happened once. Yeah, no comment. So it's very nice to sort of see you every year, see how the project is progressing. I'm the kind of point of contact for authentic biology here at Wellcome. So Dave and I have regular updates, and it's always interesting to see how the project grows and changes. So for the next half an hour or so, maybe not quite as long as that, 20 minutes, you have an opportunity to quiz us panel about ourselves and our interests, how we got to where we are and things like that. So we're going to go up the line, introduce ourselves a bit more fully, say what it is that we do, who we are, where we're working, a bit of a biog, how we got here, and maybe sort of why we're interested in what we're interested in. And then I assume there are going to be some roving mics around, and you'll have an opportunity to quiz us on some questions. So I'm going to start on my left, and we have Nadia. So Nadia, do you want to start us off?
Yes, I'm Nadia Koloteva-Levine. I work at the University of Kent. I do research. I'm research associate. I am afraid I'm not typical scientist. I've done postdoc for so many years because I can't get off it. I like it the most in my life. I also did part-time lecturing. I still enjoy being in touch with the schools, and I do outreach projects sometimes, and I've been 5 years on the Sam London Boys School in connection with the MVP Square project, and I'm happy to answer your questions.
Hi, my name's Emma Morris, and I am a scientist and a doctor. I work at UCL, and I am Professor of Cell and Gene Therapy there, and I'm also one of the bone marrow transplant consultants. I went to a state comprehensive school where I did maths, physics and chemistry because I wanted to do better than the boys in my class, and I probably just about pulled it off. And went to university, did medicine, and then after doing medicine, did a PhD, and now run my own research group and program, and I'm responsible for quite a large bit of UCL in my spare time. And I've come straight from clinic, so I have a really varied life doing science and medicine, and it's really exciting. And I've got 3 kids, and I run marathons, and that's it.
And I get to follow that, so that's nice. I think there may have been a bit of a skimming over did a PhD, and now I run quite a lot of UCL. Seems to sort of, that's not a typical progression, so I suggest you delve into that in a minute. So I'm Matt, as I said. I am a program manager for informal science learning here at Wellcome. So that means I'm kind of interested in science learning that doesn't typically take place in a classroom or in a bit of a different classroom setting. I'm interested in learning experiences that might happen in museums like the Natural History Museum or the Science Museum here in London, or opportunities to work with universities and do something that you wouldn't normally do in your science lessons. So I did science A-levels, as you might expect. I went off to do an undergraduate degree in biology because I kind of wasn't sure which bit of biology I was interested in. I then was just procrastinating. I got to the end of my degree and quite liked neuroscience. I was like, oh, okay, I'm going to do a master's in neuroscience. That seems like a little way to kill some time. And at the end of that, I was still procrastinating. I was like, oh, okay, I better do a PhD because that's another 3 years of time. And the Wellcome Trust, I was very fortunate to have a Wellcome Trust-funded PhD down at the University of Bristol. And then eventually I was like, actually, research isn't really my area. But I did enjoy talking about research and kind of engaging people with science. And I was very fortunate to get a job in what we call public engagement with science. So since that kind of move, I've worked in more of the sort of formal education stuff, trying to influence what genetics is taught in schools, because a lot of it is a bit dull. And then obviously bringing me here to Wellcome today.
So I'm Martin Warren. I'm a professor of biochemistry at the University of Kent. Previously, I did my degrees at the University of Southampton. Then I was off to Texas for a couple of years as a postdoc. I came back to Queen Mary for a lectureship. I then moved to the Institute of Ophthalmology, which is part of UCL, for 4 or 5 years. Then I moved back to Queen Mary for another stint before I went back to before I went to Kent. And I've actually been at Kent for over 10 years, which is the longest I've been anywhere. So I just find science fascinating. I like to be involved in all kinds of aspects. I like to see how science can be applied to a whole range of different projects. I've done documentaries, I've done basic science, I've done applied science, and I just like the excitement that comes with science, and I like the excitement that's seen especially by young people, which is why I'm so keen on the outreach side of things.
Great. Okay, thank you, everyone. So we could carry on, but that won't be as interesting as you asking us some difficult questions that we have to think about. So does anybody want to kick us off? Oh, go on. Otherwise, the people with the microphones will just stand around and they'll be sad. We have. Thank you.
Nothing is too embarrassing to ask.
We'll go with that for the moment, and then we'll see. We'll see what comes in.
Hi. You say you're all interested in outreach. I was wondering who you think it's the most important to reach out to as part of your role.
Anybody want to start with that? Martin's leaning forward.
Well, only because you were looking at me.
Yeah, that's how it works.
So I think people are fundamentally interested in how things work, and so therefore people are fundamentally interested in science, even if they don't think they're scientists. I always remember there's a good story that Becky Parker tells when she went along to. So I don't know if you know Becky, but Becky, everybody at Simon Langton will know Becky. But she's a remarkable teacher with a huge amount of enthusiasm, and that's probably just being polite, isn't it? But she had her daughter along, and they went to a science fair down at Pfizer, and her young daughter was obviously brought up with getting very excited over all kinds of science. And so one of the scientists at Pfizer said to Becky's daughter and said, "Are you going to be a scientist when you grow up?" And this young child looked up at him and in all incredulity and said, "But I am a scientist." And I think as soon as you start asking why, what, how, you are becoming a scientist. And so therefore there is a natural questioning that we all do. And so therefore I think everybody does like to do it. It's just whether we can explain it well enough so that people can understand it. And I think we've just got to be able to be so much better at talking in general terms about science. When we write papers, we've got to be so precise, we've got to use such complicated language that sometimes we forget how we can take that and just make it so much easier for the general public to understand. And that's the key to being a good communicator.
Thank you.
I think a large part of my job when I have my doctor's hat on is explaining to my patients and their families and their friends what's actually wrong with them and why we're embarking on a series of investigations or tests and what the results mean. And actually that is all science, that's not medicine. And when people turn around to you and say, well, what does a magnetic resonance imaging scan, how does it work? Why is it so noisy when I go in it? And why is it different to a CT scan? And why is it different to an X-ray? And you're sort of sat there thinking, oh, well, because it's more expensive and it's better. But actually, that's not what they want to know. They want to know, why do I have to have this particular test? And why are you going to make a decision on my treatment based on the results of that test? So I spend a lot of my time explaining so people can understand and actually so people can trust you that you're making the right decision about their healthcare. And I give my medical example because I think actually it's valid for all of science. So you think about all the technology around us. You go and buy a brand new car or even a brand new smartphone. Actually, you want to make sure it doesn't blow up in your back pocket when you're on the bus on the way to school. And you're trusting someone who's been a design scientist, engineer working in some telephone agency that they'll actually understand the physics of the battery and how it's going to work and how it's going to function in the plastic coating or whatever the phone is. Because you kind of expect people who are making decisions or producing things to get it right. And actually, we're all fallible as human beings, and not everything is entirely predictable. So, and it's the same in medicine, and it's the same in science. So being able to explain what the probability of something being right or wrong or being the right decision, actually, I think it's all a scientific way of thinking. And I think it could be applicable to almost anything. And I don't know, you can only expect someone to trust you if they understand what you're talking about.
Yes, if I can add something about outreach, because I do it with a different age of children, and as smaller they are, then it's more interesting. It's more interesting to see this waking up interest and a question they ask. And they write magnificent letters, which I will frame when I will retire it in my home, and I will put them on a wall. I never, ever got anything better in my life. But what was interesting also for me to observe in Simon London Boys' School is a school with very, very bright kids, and lots of them want to do medicine, and this is why they take biology for A-level. When they come to our MVP Square Day, we do research, but it's a medical research. We want to help patients. We want to answer some questions, but not by prescribing them known medicine with some side effects, or which doesn't work on everyone. We want to know what the problem is in order to be able to answer it correctly and then maybe help everyone. So there is another way to look at the medical career. There is a biomedical career where you become a scientist and you're as much interested in the health and well-being of people as doctors are, but you just do it from different angles. And we need bright people there, very, very bright people. And I have seen in my 5 years going there how some people changed their decisions and went to study biochemistry or biomedical science. And this is very inspiring. And I think it's the main reason why I go there, really.
Great, thank you. Any more questions? Yeah, go ahead.
I was just going to ask something to try and get the ball rolling. I've got a couple of questions, actually. One that goes back to the George III talk, where I was just going to ask, how do people with this mutation actually live? Because if they've blown out that enzyme, how do they make hemoglobin at all? And then a sort of more general question, which I was thinking about while you were answering that previous question, is do we need to change the science curriculum in schools? Because at the moment it's not science. It's about receiving information, receiving facts, which might be interesting if you're interested in circulation, and which most students find incredibly dull if it's about plants. But it's not science. It's not asking questions and testing them.
Okay, thank you. I'll get Martin answer the first one quickly.
Okay, so the first one is quite simple. Is that we people who have zero enzyme activity obviously wouldn't live because they can't produce any heme. But generally, if you have a mutation, that will affect one gene on one of your strands of DNA, and so you've still got the other active gene. So you end up with having half the normal level of enzyme in your body. And so people can cope with the half level so long as the pathway isn't stimulated too much. So if you need to make a lot of heme, then you cause the bottleneck in the pathway. If you don't need much heme, then there is no bottleneck and the patient lives quite normally. So it's a strange thing with people who suffer with porphyria. Probably 80% of them will never suffer with any physical symptoms. And it's really only about 20% suffer with the symptoms. So it can even appear to jump generations because of that property of these disorders.
Cool, thank you. So do we need to change science curriculum in schools? Hands up who enjoys learning about science in school. Wow, that's a really half-baked response, guys. Hands high up, maybe, if you enjoy learning about science in school. Okay, who thinks that their science could be not taught, that the curriculum that they have to learn at school is less interesting than it could be? Interesting. Can I have some opinions as to why that is? You've all just put your hand up, so you've all just volunteered an opinion on that. So can we get the roving mics around to people here?
Is it because your kind teachers who brought you here are rubbish?
Is it? Thank you.
Well, I just feel that since secondary school, it's been very exam orientated. So you have to write what's on the mark scheme to get the marks, and there's no room for creativity, which is very important in science as well. So I think that's where things like authentic biology come in, because you get to have a feel of real science, of what science is like in real life, and not just reading out of a textbook. Yeah.
Thank you very much. It's very articulately put. And is that a general agreement with that? Anybody want to offer a different view as to why things should be different? Does anybody want to offer a view as to why the current setup is perfect and why it shouldn't change? Okay, yeah.
I find that the science we get taught isn't at all challenged. It's things that you kind of accept to be true. So by the end, you don't get a sense of science progressing. It's just all that way. And you have to kind of get into further reading and be really interested to get a sense of like the actual field and how it's constantly changing and is more interesting than what the fact in a textbook is that you read. Great,
thank you. Okay, panel. Emma, you are leaning forward. You are keen. You're leaning back. Okay. Any thoughts?
I think one of the things to say about textbooks actually is that they're terribly, terribly out of date. And it's not the fault of necessarily your probably slightly underfunded or more than slightly underfunded schools and our education system, but actually it's the fact that you're exactly right. Science and research is moving forward at such a pace that actually even if you're working in a very small niche of a field, yourself and running a whole research program in that field, I could spend all day and all night reading the research papers of my competitor groups around the world and do nothing else just to keep up with what they're doing. And that's how much information is being churned out with new scientific results all the time. And of course, because of the internet, it's just a massive surge of information all the time. And I guess it would be, on one level, completely impossible to teach very up-to-date facts in a school-based learning system every year and change it every year. I mean, it's just not doable. But I think what you've highlighted is actually science isn't about learning facts. It's about thinking in a different way and challenging things and questioning what you see and whether everything you see is actually what it really is, and what its relevance is and whether it could be relevant to something that nobody's really thought about before. And it's that sort of thing, inspiring you to think differently, to think outside of the box, is the real challenge for your enthusiastic, committed teachers. And that's hard to do, but I think that's the key. And I think, you guys have got an amazing opportunity to be involved with projects like this, and that's exactly what that's offering you.
We are nearly out of time, so are there any further questions that people would like to ask? I'm going to aim for students, if at all possible, so hang on. There was a question in front of me there, and then there's one there. So we're going to take all three of these questions in, and then we're going to... So just dead in front of me, the lady who asked this question earlier. Yeah, thank you. And then we've got two over here. So whoever's got a microphone on this, yeah, go ahead over to my left.
Is there a difference between the research opportunities for those that do medicine and then go into research, and those that do like biomedical sciences and then go into research?
Okay, so that's one difference between biomedical research and medical research careers, was that?
Or difference between opportunities to do research if you're a medic or if you're trained as a scientist. Yeah. And I would say, to keep it very brief, because I'm conscious of the time, no. If you're a scientist, you think the medics find it easier to get grant funding for their research projects. As a medic, you think it's harder to get... it's not harder to get the funding, but it's harder to deliver the project because you're spending half your time doing medicine and not all your time doing research. So do what you love.
Yeah.
Do what you love. That's the best advice.
And then, did you have a question as well? Do you want to grab the microphone?
How did you go from doing a PhD from running half of UCL or something.
Yeah.
Or part of UCL rather than
So
half of UCL.
We're going to bank that one and then go ahead.
Okay, it's a weird question, but as scientists, what's the worst thing that's ever happened to you, and how did you pick yourself back up?
I spelled ethidium bromide across my crotch once, which was a terrifying moment. If you don't know what ethidium bromide is, it's a powerful mutagen. So I picked myself back up by phoning my housemate and asking him to bring in a clean pair of trousers. Yeah, which wasn't ideal. But I think my supervisor once spilled quite strong 32p across himself as well. Health and safety is great in labs. Okay, so worst thing we've done as scientists, and how did you find yourself in those intervening couple of years between PhD and running a lot of UCL? Do you want to start us off, Nadia, with worst thing?
Well, I still worse. I don't know. There's so many things. I would remember. Of course, worse is to lose your result. When you do your best experiment and you think you're going to get the Nobel Prize and publish 3 Nature paper and you can't find it. That's probably far the worst which happened to me. Health and safety, it's endless. I mean, it's all, honestly, we don't have time for that. Yes, some people come and manage to run half a UCL, but actually I got stuck after PhD. I got a postdoc researcher, and I'm still there, and it's many years now. And maybe, yes, I would like to have my own group and people working for me in my own project, but I won't be in a lab. I won't be doing experiments. I'll be sitting in the office, and I've done a little bit of that, and I didn't like it. So I'm afraid I can't answer that.
So you're speaking next. So do you want to cover how you got to where you are, maybe the beginning of that, and worst thing?
A worst thing is actually recruiting patients to a first-in-human clinical trial when you don't know whether the drug you're going to give them will do them any harm or not.
So do people understand the notion of a first-in-human clinical trial? General nodding? Okay.
So, and that, when that doesn't go well, you have a very significant sense of responsibility about it. And you have to be really certain that all the data that you've acquired in your research lab in the preceding 5-10 years, which has been analysed by lots of other people, external regulators, etc., that it's not incorrect, and it is still justifiable, and it makes you doubt for a while. So some of these treatments that I'll be talking to you about today, which everyone's very excited about because they're a very exciting new way to treat cancer, the first few times they were tried, patients died. And it's having that belief to carry on, but also being able to have the humility to realise that when you try things for the first time, they're not always going to work. And actually, if it's an experiment in a dish, it's not as important as if it's somebody's life, so someone's mother or father or partner. And I think the thing I learned most was the sense of responsibility and being really acutely aware of the fact that research is a real part. When you're doing medical research, it's a real partnership between you and the patient. We can't do it without them, and they can't potentially have new treatments without us.
Thank you. Martin.
Well, I think the worst thing that happens is when somebody beats you to whatever it is you're trying to find out. So being scooped is quite possibly the worst thing that can happen. But similarly, being the first to find out something is such a high that it's difficult to beat. So when you find out something, you're the only person in the world who knows that. That's difficult to beat, and then to tell everybody else. That's the best.
I'm still waiting.
Nice, thank you very much. Actually, in seriousness, I will just comment that if you do a PhD, then there are kind of, you're finished, you may be aware that you have to write a thesis, which is a kind of a large book outlining what you've just done over the preceding 3 or 4 years or so. And you are then quizzed by 2 examiners. It's called a viva. Okay, so 2 examiners, one from within your university and one from another university, sit down and they basically ask you about anything to do with your thesis. It actually can be broader than that. And on the basis of the thesis that you submit and that questions, you then pass your PhD. And there are kind of a few options. You either pass, sail through, that's it, everything's done. No one does that. You have minor corrections, which is what most people have. So you need to adjust a few graphs. You could have major corrections where you have to go back and do a significant amount of work. That's quite uncommon. And then you can be told to have an MPhil. And I had major corrections, and that was really difficult because my funding had come to an end. There wasn't an obvious opportunity for me to stay on. I ended up I had another 6 months in the lab, which was kind of fine, but then I had to finish my PhD, having moved out of scientific research and working full-time in another job. And that's, I've heard of other people finishing their PhD having left science and moved into other areas. But on top of that, having additional work to do, it was a real bind and a real burden, and I hadn't had the easiest PhD experience for various reasons, and so yeah, it was difficult, but ultimately kind of finding out that actually I love science and I love finding out about the nitty-gritty and the minutiae of science, but I'm not the best person at doing that research, was quite a useful thing to learn about myself, and I love my current job. So you know, even when it doesn't go in the right direction, you're probably finding out something useful. Okay, I've let us run over by 5 minutes, so I do apologise for Dave's timekeeping. Thank you very much, all. We've been a panel, and you are going to now hear from Emma.